Good morning/afternoon/evening, everyone. Today, I'm here to talk about a moment that shook not just India, but the entire world, a moment when words became more powerful than weapons. Recently, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi delivered a statement that left Americans and much of the global audience absolutely stunned. His reply wasn't just bold, it was savage, direct, and full of confidence. It wasn't merely a political response, it was a reflection of India's rising voice on the world stage. In this speech, we'll dive into what exactly was said, why it carried such weight, and how it revealed the growing power, pride, and perspective of India in global affairs. India's voice on the global stage is louder than ever because the country has reached a point where its economic, political, and cultural influence cannot be ignored. For decades, India was often seen as a developing nation struggling with poverty and internal challenges, but in recent years it has transformed into one of the fastest growing economies in the world. This rise has given India a stronger platform to express its opinions on global matters, whether it is trade, climate change, security, or technology. The shift is not only about economic growth, it is also about confidence, leadership, and the ability to stand firm against global powers. When Prime Minister Modi speaks at international forums, his words now carry weight because they represent a nation of over a billion people whose aspirations are tied to progress and global recognition. India's growing influence is also a result of its strategic positioning. It sits at the center of major global alliances, building partnerships with countries in Asia, Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Unlike in the past, India is not simply following the lead of bigger powers, but is carving out its own independent path. This independence is seen in how India takes decisions that serve its national interest, even if they surprise or unsettle other nations. For example, whether it is in trade negotiations or in maintaining relations with rival countries at the same time, India has shown that it will not bow to external pressure. This makes its voice stronger because it is based on self-reliance and determination rather than dependency. The rise of India's voice is also tied to its achievements in technology and innovation. The success of the space mission Chandrayaan, the rapid digitalization of its economy, and its role as a leader in vaccine production during the COVID-19 pandemic all proved that India is not just participating in global progress, but is driving it. These achievements enhance the credibility of India's leadership and make its statements more impactful. When India speaks about development, equality, or cooperation, it speaks from a position of experience and authority. Another key reason why India's voice is louder is the growing sense of national pride among its people. Citizens see their country no longer as a follower, but as a leader, and this collective pride gives power to the words of their leaders. Prime Minister Modi often reflects this pride in his speeches, which resonate both within India and abroad. The assertive tone of his replies, especially when addressing foreign criticism or questions, shows that India is confident in defending its image. Such confidence is new on the international stage and marks a shift from being cautious to being bold. In summary, India's voice is louder today because it is backed by economic strength, strategic independence, technological achievements, and national pride. When Modi delivers a sharp or savage reply, it carries more significance because it reflects not just one leader's personality, but the growing assertiveness of an entire nation that is ready to be heard and respected worldwide. Prime Minister Modi's savage reply shocked the world because it was not only unexpected, but also delivered with a level of confidence and boldness that leaders of large democracies rarely display in front of global audiences. In politics, words are often carefully chosen, wrapped in diplomacy, and presented in a way that avoids direct confrontation. However, Modi's reply broke away from this pattern. Instead of being subtle, he used strong and straightforward language that left no room for doubt about his intentions or about India's stance on the issue. This kind of directness is rare, especially when addressing powerful nations like the United States, which is why Americans and many others around the world were taken aback. The reason his reply stood out was because it came at a time when many expected India to remain cautious in its international dealings. Traditionally, Indian leaders have maintained a softer, balanced tone in order to avoid conflict with global powers. Modi's words, however, challenged this assumption and presented a new image of India, one that is not afraid to speak its mind. The reply was not only sharp but also calculated, designed to assert authority while simultaneously highlighting India's growing influence. It was a moment that symbolized India's shift from defensive diplomacy to offensive confidence. The shock factor also comes from the way the reply was perceived. To many Americans, the idea that a leader of another nation, especially from Asia, could respond in such a bold way was surprising. They are used to hearing softer, more deferential tones from countries that rely heavily on global powers for support. Modi's reply broke that image completely. It showed that India no longer fits into the category of nations that quietly accept criticism or instructions. Instead, it demonstrated that India can push back with equal or even greater intensity. This reversal of expectation is what made the reply stand out so much in the global conversation. Furthermore, the savage nature of the reply was not just about the words themselves, but also about the timing and delivery. Modi has a reputation for using powerful rhetoric that connects with both ordinary citizens and global leaders. His tone, expressions, and assertive body language gave even more weight to the message. It was not just a statement, it was a performance that left a strong impression. Leaders who can combine message and delivery effectively are the ones who make the world listen, and in that moment, Modi captured global attention. The deeper reason the world was shocked is because this reply symbolized the rise of a new global order. It reflected the fact that India is not willing to accept a secondary role anymore. Instead, it wants to define its own position in international politics. A savage reply was a way to send a message to the world: India will not be intimidated, and it will not hesitate to respond with equal strength when challenged. For many observers, this was a wake-up call that India has entered a new era of leadership. In conclusion, Modi's savage reply shocked the world because it defied expectations, broke the tradition of cautious diplomacy, and announced India's boldness on the global stage. It was more than just a reply. It was a declaration that India is ready to engage with the world on its own terms, without fear and without hesitation. Americans couldn't believe the boldness of Prime Minister Modi's words because they were not accustomed to hearing such direct and fearless replies from the leader of a country that, for many decades, had been seen as careful, diplomatic, and somewhat cautious in its international approach. For a long time, global politics had been dominated by Western powers, and the expectation was that leaders from developing countries would maintain a respectful, sometimes even submissive tone when speaking about or to nations like the United States. Modi's words disrupted that expectation completely. They were bold, unapologetic, and delivered in a way that signaled strength rather than hesitation. To Americans who were used to their own leaders setting the tone, hearing a foreign leader speak with such confidence was shocking and, for many, eye-opening. The boldness of his words came not just from their sharpness but from their intent. Modi was not trying to please anyone, nor was he seeking validation from global powers. Instead, he was asserting India's independence and authority. This kind of confidence is usually expected from leaders of superpowers, but not often from those leading countries still in transition toward that status. Americans, therefore, found it surprising that Modi's tone was not defensive or reactive, but proactive and fearless. It was as though India, through his words, was telling the world that it no longer needed to seek approval. It was ready to speak for itself and stand firm against criticism. The surprise among Americans also had cultural roots. In American political culture, boldness is admired, but it is usually reserved for domestic leaders and their speeches. When another nation's leader speaks boldly, especially one who challenges assumptions or calls out hypocrisy, it can be unsettling. Modi's words were bold not only in their message, but also in how they reversed the usual roles. Instead of India being on the receiving end of global commentary, Modi positioned India as a voice of strength that others needed to listen to. This reversal of roles was one reason why many Americans could hardly believe what they were hearing. Another factor was timing. The world is in a period of shifting power dynamics, with emerging nations like India stepping into greater roles on global platforms. Americans are used to being at the center of decision making, but Modi's boldness was a reminder that the global stage is changing. His words carried the energy of a rising power, and that energy challenged the long-standing dominance of the West. To many American observers, it felt like a warning that the old world order, where the U.S. set the tone and others followed, was no longer as strong as before. The boldness also lay in the fact that Modi did not dilute his message with unnecessary politeness or ambiguity. Instead, he chose words that were sharp, clear, and impossible to ignore. This directness made the message powerful because it left no space for misinterpretation. Americans, who often pride themselves on being straightforward, were confronted with a version of boldness that matched or even exceeded their own. This was another reason they were taken aback. In essence, Americans couldn't believe the boldness of Modi's words because they reflected a level of courage and self-assurance that they had not expected from an Indian leader. His tone, timing, and directness challenged long-standing assumptions about India's role in world politics. It was a moment when the balance of perception shifted, and India showed that it was no longer content to be in the background, but was prepared to take center stage with words as strong as its ambitions. It was more than politics, it was power in speech, because the moment went beyond the usual exchanges of leaders and entered the realm of influence, emotion, and authority. Political speeches are often filled with statistics, promises, or diplomatic statements meant to maintain balance. But what made Modi's words stand out was the force they carried. His reply was not just a calculated political response, but an expression of strength that resonated with millions. Power in speech is the ability to make people feel something, to stir pride, and to challenge assumptions. In that moment, Modi demonstrated that words can have the same impact as actions. His speech carried the weight of a rising nation, and that power transformed it from a simple political comment into a symbolic act of leadership. The real strength of his words came from their authenticity. Unlike typical political remarks that feel rehearsed or artificial, Modi's tone reflected conviction. People could sense that he meant what he said and that he was speaking from a place of confidence, not caution. This authenticity gave his words greater authority, because power in speech is not just about delivery, but also about belief. A leader who speaks with conviction has the ability to move both supporters and critics. For Americans listening, it was not only the content of the reply that stood out, but the unmistakable strength behind it. Another reason it was more than politics is that it connected deeply with the Indian public as well. When a leader speaks boldly on an international stage, it is not just for foreign audiences, but also for the citizens watching back home. Modi's words reflected the pride and determination of millions of Indians who wanted their country to be respected as an equal player on the world stage. His reply became a reflection of national identity, not just political strategy. The power of speech lies in its ability to unite and inspire, and this moment did exactly that. Globally, too, the reply carried symbolic weight. It sent a message that India's leaders were no longer going to play a secondary role in world affairs. The words embodied a sense of independence, one that signaled India's readiness to challenge narratives that placed Western nations at the center. This kind of speech is powerful because it shifts perspectives. It forces the world to rethink the balance of authority and to recognize that emerging powers are ready to assert themselves. In this way, the reply became more than a statement. It was a declaration of presence. The delivery also mattered. Modi has a style of speaking that is clear, firm, and filled with pauses that emphasize his points. This gave his words rhythm and gravity, turning them into something memorable. A political reply might fade quickly, but a powerful speech lingers in memory, quoted and repeated long after it is delivered. This is why his words were seen as a defining moment rather than just another part of political debate. Ultimately, what made it more than politics was the emotional charge it carried. Politics is often about strategy, negotiation, and compromise, but power in speech is about creating an impact that lives beyond the moment. Modi's reply became a symbol of strength, pride, and independence. It reminded the world that India is not only growing in size and economy, but also in confidence and voice. In that moment, words carried the power of a nation, and that is why they went beyond politics into the realm of lasting influence. A message of pride, confidence, and independence echoed in Prime Minister Modi's words because they were not crafted simply to answer a question or counter a criticism, but to represent the spirit of a nation that has grown into its own strength. Pride was visible in the way he spoke of India's progress and identity. For centuries, India had been seen through the lens of colonial history, poverty, and struggle, but his words projected a different reality, that of a nation proud of its heritage, achievements, and growing role in the world. Pride in speech is powerful because it does not just reflect the emotions of the speaker, but also connects deeply with the people listening. Modi's words resonated with Indians everywhere who saw in them a reflection of their own aspirations for global recognition. Confidence was the second layer of his message. The tone of his reply did not carry hesitation, fear, or uncertainty. Instead, it was firm, steady, and clear, qualities that show belief in one's position. This confidence did not appear overnight. It is built on the foundation of India's economic growth, technological success, and diplomatic strength in recent years. When a leader speaks with confidence, it signals to the world that the nation behind him is secure in its path and unwilling to bend under pressure. Americans, and indeed many others, were stunned by this display of confidence because it showed that India had crossed a threshold. It was no longer speaking from the sidelines, but from the center. Independence was the third and perhaps most striking element. The reply carried the unmistakable message that India does not need to depend on approval from anyone else to define its policies or choices. For a long time, developing countries often had to balance their decisions carefully, fearing economic or political backlash from global powers. But Modi's words signaled a break from this pattern. They showed that India is willing to chart its own course, make its own alliances, and stand by its decisions even if they do not align with the expectations of others. Independence in speech reflects independence in action, and this was why his reply carried so much force. It was not merely an answer, it was a declaration of self-reliance. What made this combination of pride, confidence, and independence even more powerful was the fact that it mirrored the mood of the Indian people. Citizens increasingly see their country as one that is rising, capable of competing with the world's biggest economies and deserving of respect. When a leader's words align with the collective emotions of the people, they become far more than rhetoric. They transform into a shared expression of identity. Modi's reply thus became a national moment, one where Indians everywhere felt represented on the world stage. For the international audience, the message was equally strong. It reminded them that India's leadership was no longer satisfied with symbolic roles, but was determined to influence global dialogue. Pride gave the reply emotional strength, confidence gave it credibility, and independence gave it authority. Together, these qualities ensured that his words were not just heard, but felt. In essence, the reply stood out because it carried a layered message that India is proud of its journey, confident in its position, and independent in its choices. This was not simply political talk. It was a reflection of a nation stepping fully into its power and demanding recognition on equal terms with the world's most influential countries. India is no longer just listening, it is leading. For decades, India's role in global conversations was more passive. It often listened carefully to the decisions of larger powers, aligning itself cautiously to maintain balance and avoid conflict. While this approach helped the country survive in difficult times, it also meant that India's voice was not always fully heard or taken seriously. Today, that image has changed dramatically. India has emerged as a leader, not only in terms of population and economy, but also in shaping the global narrative. When Prime Minister Modi spoke with strength and conviction, it symbolized this shift. His words reflected the reality that India is no longer waiting for instructions, but is actively offering direction and influence in world affairs. This leadership is visible in multiple areas. Economically, India has become one of the fastest growing major economies, attracting investment and driving innovation in technology, space exploration, and digital infrastructure. Countries now look to India not just as a market, but as a partner in development and progress. This economic strength naturally translates into political weight, allowing India to push its own vision of global cooperation. When Modi speaks, it is not only for India, but often for the broader global South, representing nations that have long sought a stronger voice in international forums. This makes India's role unique and influential. India's leadership is also moral and cultural. As the world faces conflicts, climate challenges, and economic divides, India positions itself as a voice of balance and wisdom. Unlike nations that use aggression or dominance, India often emphasizes dialogue, peace, and sustainable growth. Yet, as Modi's sharp reply showed, this does not mean India will remain silent when challenged. The ability to combine diplomacy with firmness is a mark of true leadership, and that is exactly what the world witnessed in his words. The reply was not just about defending India's image, it was about showing that India can set the tone of the conversation. Another aspect of leadership lies in independence. True leaders do not simply echo others, they create their own path. India's refusal to blindly follow any global power, whether the U.S., Russia, or China, is part of its emerging identity as a leader. Modi's speech reinforced this by demonstrating that India will not hesitate to assert its views, even when they differ from the expectations of powerful nations. Such independence commands respect because it shows courage and conviction. Countries around the world pay attention when they see a nation that is willing to act and speak on its own terms. For the Indian people, this shift from listening to leading is deeply empowering. Citizens feel represented in a way that previous generations did not. Watching their leader speak boldly on a global stage makes them feel that India's time has arrived. This sense of pride feeds back into the nation's confidence and ambition, creating a cycle of growth and recognition. In conclusion, India's transformation into a leader on the world stage is not just about economic numbers or political alliances. It is about the ability to influence through words, actions, and vision. Modi's reply captured this essence by showing that India is ready to lead conversations, set agendas, and represent not only itself, but also the hopes of many nations looking for fairness and balance in global affairs. India is no longer the quiet observer. It is the confident leader stepping into its rightful place in history.